Have you ever experienced claustrophobia? Imagine the situation. You are crawling through a narrow underground tunnel, so narrow that in order to overcome certain sections you have to exhale all the air from your lungs and pray to all the gods in the world so as not to get stuck and suffocate. Add the awareness that there are tens of meters of rock above you, the weight of which under other circumstances would simply crush your body into a cake. What if the tunnel floods with rainwater before you can get out? In short, caving is not an activity for the faint of heart. A young American named Ted belongs to the second category. Eternal darkness and narrow tunnels are dearer to him than the most majestic mountain peaks. Ted managed to visit many locations of the underground world, but one of them attracted the guy's attention so much that he made a whole video chronicle. However, this idea led to terrible and completely unexpected consequences. But let's talk about everything in order. In the first episode, we meet the author of the video diary. Ted says that he has been exploring caves for a long time, and today he decided to record his exploits on camera. The fact is that this time he managed to find something really interesting underground. In order not to attract undue attention, he will call the location a mysterious cave. Next, Ted introduces us to his partner, who is just preparing the rope for descent. The guy wished to remain anonymous, so Ted addresses him simply as B, because that is the first letter of his name. And so, having climbed down the rope, the friends begin to move through the cave. The ceiling is quite low, so you have to walk bent over, but such trifles do not stop real researchers. An hour later, they finally reach their destination. Ted talks about the purpose of the expedition. During one of the previous descents, friends discovered a small hole in the wall of the cave, from which a very noticeable flow of air came. And this meant only one thing. The hole leads to another, previously unexplored cave. And there is no greater joy for a speleo-tourist than to be the first to climb where no human has gone before. Having illuminated the hole with flashlights, the friends realized that for 3 meters the passage remained narrow and then widened. If you try really hard, you can cover this distance by crawling. The only problem is that the entrance to the tunnel is too small for an adult. Therefore, the friends decided to take with them all the necessary tools and widen the hole enough for Ted to climb inside. Of course, while friends are not planning to show their find, suddenly someone decides to appropriate other people's laurels. By the way, they dubbed their find Floyd's Grave. This harkens back to the tragic death of American cave explorer William Floyd Collins in 1925. He got stuck in the same narrow passage, where despite all the efforts of rescuers, 2 weeks later he died of hunger, thirst and hypothermia. I wonder if all explorers of underground spaces have such a dark sense of humor. The second part of the video diary begins with Ted demonstrating the tools that his friends, with some difficulty, lowered into the cave: a hammer, chisels and an electric drill. This time, progress through the cave is complicated by the fact that it was partially flooded after heavy rain, so you have to get to Floyd's grave in ankle-deep water. Finally, the friends arrive at the scene and the treasured hole enters the frame. We see a small gap in the rock from which a draft actually blows. In the next hours, Ted and B will have to spend time listening to the sound of a hammer and the noise of an electric drill, periodically replacing each other. They will literally expand the entrance to Floyd's grave centimeter by centimeter. The main difficulty is that next to the hole you cannot help but stand up to your full height, much less make a sufficient swing with the hammer. At one point, Ted shows off the pieces of rock they managed to break off, barely larger than a fingernail. But friends are full of determination and continue this difficult work. After 3 hours, the drill battery is discharged. It is obvious that we will have to continue next time. And yet, the friends are happy with the first day of work. They managed to significantly expand the entrance to the tunnel. However, they noticed that the draft intensified. Moreover, a strange noise began to be heard from the hole, which they described as being close to the highway. Probably, passing heavy trucks create a vibration that is greatly amplified by the walls of the cave. The next video is a little different from the previous ones, because today Ted decided to organize a speleological educational program and talk about the mysterious cave and about the exploration of underground depths in general. According to him, the mysterious cave was discovered by miners about 70 years ago. Soon the object became incredibly popular among local residents, as evidenced by graffiti on the walls and mountains of garbage. Fortunately, the more distant areas still remain untouched. Next, Ted briefly talks about his equipment, as well as how the descent into the cave works. Friends tie a long rope to one of the trees growing on the surface, and then carefully lower down. Unfortunately, the process of descent itself is not captured on video, because Ted does not have a third hand to simultaneously hold on to the rope and film. And 15 minutes later, Ted is already broadcasting from a mysterious cave. The descent was a success, and now the friends await a journey in pitch darkness. They leave their descent equipment near the entrance. In the low tunnels of the cave, it will only get in the way. On the way to Floyd's grave, we are shown several of the already mentioned graffiti. Ted also reflects on his unusual hobby. Tourism is when you crawl through a tunnel and get a thrill from realizing how deep underground you are. Ted also shows an exercise for novice cave explorers. Once you get deep enough, you need to sit on a rock and turn off the flashlight. In complete darkness, hearing and touch are heightened to the limit, and this, according to Ted, is a wonderful feeling. But at the same time, every beginner should know, hearing and touch will never lead you out of the cave, so it is important to have a sufficient number of light sources. Ted, for example, always takes 2 or 3 flashlights with him, as well as several fluorescent sticks for a very last resort. Ted says that he started cave climbing about 1.5 years ago, and at first he always caught panic in particularly narrow places. But over time he was able to overcome his claustrophobia, and now traveling through such tunnels even brings him pleasure. At the end of the video, Ted arrives at the entrance to Floyd's grave. It turns out that while we were being given a tour of the cave, B wasted no time in diligently hammering on a chisel. A little more and the mysterious cave will reveal all its secrets. At the beginning of the new video, Ted answers a question that has long interested everyone. Why do they go down into the cave late at night? The answer is simple. It is always dark in the cave. The concept of time is absent there as such, so there is no difference at what time to descend into the bowels of the earth. Today the friends decided to take an unexpected partner with them. Meet Whip, a Jack Russell Terrier dog. B took his pet into the cave so that the dog could help scout out Floyd's grave, because Whip, unlike Ted and B, would definitely crawl into the tunnel. Having descended underground, the dog was not at all afraid of the darkness and confined space. On the contrary, Whip began to explore the new location with interest. However, the dog's behavior changed dramatically as soon as the friends got to Floyd's grave. Whip stopped and froze, but Ted and B didn't think much of it and continued working on widening the entrance. We watch B drill into the rock for a while, and then suddenly stops and listens. When Ted asks what happened, B replies that he had just finished working with the drill when he heard a strange sound from the passage. It sounded like a grinding sound, as if someone was moving a heavy stone across the cave floor. However, nothing else happened, and the guys decided to continue working. You never know what you might hear. Deciding not to torture the tired animal any longer, Ted and B decide that's enough for today. In addition, the drill's battery had finally run out, and the lights began to shine alarmingly dimly. The new video begins with commotion and Ted's worried voices. As it turned out, B injured his hand during the descent, but fortunately everything turned out okay, and he even got to work as if nothing had happened. In addition, 2 pieces of news. The draft from the hole has returned. Yes, last time friends noticed that the wind was no longer blowing from Floyd's grave. What can you do? The bowels of the earth conceal a lot of strange and unknown things. Second news, they decided not to take Whip with them anymore. The dog clearly had little pleasure listening to the noise of a working drill for several hours. Yes, and she behaved strangely. In other words, they decided not to rape the dog's psyche anymore, and thanks to them for that. And so Ted and B get to work together. During a break, Ted admits that he never expected widening the passage to be such a tedious task, but he continues to believe that the reward for his efforts will be appropriate. However, B looks at things more realistically, because even an ordinary cave on the other side of the passage will already become a grand discovery. It's Ted's turn to drill into the cave wall. Dripping with sweat, he works with a drill but suddenly stops and literally jumps away from the passage. For a few seconds we hear a scream, as if some wounded creature is calling for help. Then there is silence, interrupted only by Ted's loud breathing. The friends are seriously alarmed. The cave has never presented such surprises before. And by the way, the wind disappeared from the hole again. A little more and they decide to quickly get out of the cave. No one understood what the sound was, but the friends felt somehow uneasy. And yet, the exploratory spirit of our heroes is not so easy to kill, because the very next day they return to the cave again. Judging by the conversations, they decided to safely forget yesterday's incident, because the hole in Floyd's grave had already become wide enough for Ted, as the slimmer participant in the hike, to climb inside. Just in case, having tied one leg with a rope, Ted sets off towards the unknown. Every centimeter is difficult, because the passage is strewn with sharp fragments of stones, and yet the guy manages to climb far enough. He is almost completely hidden in the tunnel. The only problem is that there is one bottleneck left approximately in the middle of the passage. If you remove it, the path to the cave on the other side of the tunnel will be clear. Inspired by the victory, the friends leave to return as soon as possible and finish what they started. Several months of hard work were not in vain. Now only half a tunnel separates them from the mysterious cave, and now the long-awaited visit to the cave finally took place. Armed with a hammer, Ted climbs into the passage and begins to chop up the ledge that is preventing further advancement. Soon our hero realizes that there is enough space, and he will definitely be able to climb further. True, this will have to be done in a very specific position, stretching one arm forward and moving the other back. At least this way his shoulders will definitely fit into the narrow tunnel. Judging by the timing on the camera, it took Ted about 10 minutes to crawl 3 meters, but it was worth it, because now we see a new cave in the footage. Perseverance and ingenuity took their toll. Ted truly became a pioneer. He warns B that he will be back within half an hour. After all, he needs to thoroughly examine the find. The cave turns out to be really spacious, and the flashlight beam is clearly not enough to see the whole picture. But judging by Ted's cheerful comments, the cave looks great. He films various rock formations, the nature of which only specialists can explain. One of the finds especially surprises Ted. This is a large stone, as if leaning against the wall of the cave. Was all this really created by nature itself? But then everything gets even more interesting. On another wall, Ted notices something similar to cave paintings, roughly scratched figures located under some strange symbol. Ted immediately rushes back and shouts through the tunnel to B about his incredible discovery. He decides that there are enough impressions for today, because there is still a difficult path ahead through Floyd's grave. And while Ted is crawling along a narrow tunnel, a rumble is heard behind him again, which his friends previously attributed to departing trucks. Having emerged from the tunnel, Ted literally attacks B with his impressions of being in the discovered cave. Crystals, cave paintings, strange stones. He can't wait to go back and explore the location in more detail. However, it is unsafe to do this alone, and since B clearly will not fit into the tunnel, the friends decide for the first time to involve an outsider in their affairs. A week after the events of the previous episode, the friends arrive again, this time in daylight and in the company of a guy who introduces himself as Joe. This is probably not his real name, and the guys continue to follow the rules of conspiracy. Ted brings Joe up to date and explains his plan. The two of them will crawl through the tunnel, after which they will explore the discovered cave for 2 hours, noting everything unusual and interesting. For some reason, they did not tell their new partner about the strange wind and sounds from the cave. Probably Ted and B just didn't want to scare the man off ahead of time. So first Joe and then Ted disappear into the tunnel. At the same time, B is located on the outside, so that if something happens, there is someone to send for help. Joe copes with the tunnel without any problems, but something incredible happens to Ted. At some point, he forgets about underground safety precautions and, straightening up sharply, smashes his head on the stone ceiling. There was no question of continuing the campaign. The bleeding could not be stopped. As a result, the friends decided the following. Ted returns back, but Joe can examine the cave for 20 minutes to independently verify the presence of crystals and drawings on the wall. Having emerged from the tunnel, Ted records another video in which he complains about his mistake. After all, he took a helmet with him and was just about to put it on to safely explore the new cave. Suddenly, Ted notices that the wind has stopped again. He admits to B that when he crawled through the tunnel a week ago, he clearly heard the grinding of stones. Meanwhile, the allotted 20 minutes have long passed, but for some reason Joe is in no hurry to return. Alarmed, Ted and B begin calling for their missing partner. Fortunately, after some time, Joe crawls out of the tunnel, but the guy looks very bad. His whole body is covered with abrasions. When asked if everything is okay, he honestly answers that no. Joe also claims that he did not see anything unusual, after which he rushes to the exit of the cave. Apparently, the story with Joe completely unsettled the guys. The next episode begins with Ted's confused speech, the meaning of which boils down to the following. Yes, you may consider us naive idiots, but this cave means too much to us. Months of hard work, triumphs and disappointments. Therefore, we had to return and continue the research, because there were still too many unsolved mysteries: the wind, the grinding of stones, mysterious screams. After the final descent, Ted and B tried to talk to Joe, but he seemed very depressed and avoided any talk about the cave. And later, the guy disappeared from the radar altogether. B called Joe's work, but they answered that the employee had gone on sick leave. And when the guys decided to go to his house, no one opened the door, despite the light being turned on inside. 2 weeks later, the friends decided to return to finish what they started. The equipment is ready, and they begin to descend into the cave. This time, Ted and B were thoroughly prepared, and even took a portable phone with them to keep in touch in the cave. Then everything goes according to the already familiar pattern: a descent down the rope, the road to Floyd's grave, where Ted again climbs into the narrow tunnel, not forgetting about the helmet. The cave on the other side greets our hero with darkness and silence. After looking around a little, Ted sets off through the dark dungeon, filming clusters of crystals, stalactites and stalagmites, as well as a mysterious drawing on the wall. It's time to check the connection. Ted takes out his phone and turns to B. Everything works perfectly, and after a short report on what is happening, Ted goes further into the cave. Suddenly, literally behind our hero's back, the grinding sound of a heavy stone is heard. As luck would have it, the light on the helmet goes out, and Ted is left in complete darkness. How can you not panic? Despite the horror that grips him, with trembling hands he takes out the last saving tool, a fluorescent wand. Of course, it doesn't make much sense, but it's better than nothing. Ted throws his wand to light the way, but the wand disappears into the darkness. There remains the last hope of contacting B, but it also does not work. Ted lights the second wand and begins to look for a way out in its dim light. At some point, he notices that a large stone that stood near the wall has been moved to the side. Moreover, a new tunnel is visible behind the stone. It was there that the thrown stick flew away, disappearing from sight. The situation became more and more alarming, because the stone could not move on its own. Ted rushes as fast as he can, practically not making out the road. He breaks his arms and legs into blood, tears his clothes, and then a new sound is heard behind him, which gives our hero horror. Someone is blowing on him. Having reached Floyd's grave, he literally dives into a narrow tunnel. "Run, B, save yourself!" Ted shouts and almost gets stuck in the passage. But today, luck is once again on the guy's side. Having reached the rope, they climb up without any equipment, to where there is fresh air and moonlight, to where there is salvation. The final episode begins in a very unusual way. No caves, tunnels, or flashlight light. Ted sits in his house and shares the events of recent days. After going to the cave, he began to have auditory and visual hallucinations, and at night he was haunted by nightmares. A man who once embarked on the craziest adventures is now afraid to even leave the house. While searching for similar stories, he came across the legend of the Hoga, a creature with the head of a frog, the deer face of a giant elephant, thick short legs with huge claws, the back of a dinosaur, and a long tail with spikes at the end. Perhaps this particular monster lives in the mysterious cave. Or maybe Ted became a victim of a Wendigo, or another evil spirit that the indigenous people of America trembled before. Suddenly Ted falls silent as steps are heard on the threshold of the house. The alarmed owner slowly approaches the front door. A new entry was made at 10 a.m. Ted is fine because the mystery guests were Joe and B. Of course, this is complete madness, but the guys decided to return to the cave again. Why? Ted can't give a rational answer. After everything that happened, the cave seemed to attract him, and the new tunnel, which was hidden behind a stone, haunts me. 2 hours later, the trio moved to the cave. They took food supplies, medicines, knives, and a pistol. This time, the guys are ready to go to the end. Already standing at the descent into the cave, Ted turns to his friends and relatives. "Don't worry, I'll be fine. I plan to return either late at night or at the very least tomorrow morning. Come visit if you want to see everything filmed. See you soon."